A warm welcome to the world today. I'm Joke Rogers. Today we begin in Europe, where President Donald Trump has doubled down on his claim that recent U.S. airstrikes have completely obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. This is despite a leaked Pentagon assessment suggesting the impact may have only delayed the program by a few months. Mr. Trump, speaking from the NATO summit in The Hague, insisted that strikes which targeted key sites at Fordo, Isfahan and Natanz have set Iran's nuclear ambitions back by decades. Israel has affirmed this, with the Atomic Energy Commission claiming the Fordo facility was rendered inoperable. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also said the country has been successful in curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions as well as destroying its missile arsenal. However, the leaked report from U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency calls the damage limited, suggesting that Iran had already evacuated enriched uranium and key equipment. However, International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafa Grossi also says it's undeniable that Iran maintains the industrial capacity and technical knowledge for its nuclear program. Meanwhile, the ceasefire between Iran and Israel seems to be holding as Iranian officials report regular operations paused by U.S. and Israel strikes have resumed.
I think basically decades, because I don't think they'll ever do it again. I just don't think they're going to. I think they're going to take their oil. They're going to have some missiles, and they'll have some defense. I think they've had it. I mean, they just went through hell. I think they've had it. The last thing they want to do is enrich. They've been trying to do it. By the way, it's hard to enrich. And, you know, when you look at a site like that, very, very hard to build. Very, very hard. Very expensive. They spent trillions of dollars trying to do this thing, and they didn't come up with it. And we're actually getting along with them very well right now. But had we not succeeded with that hit ended the war. That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now. It's gone for years. Very tough to rebuild because the whole thing is collapsed. In other words, inside, it's all collapsed. Nobody can get in to see it because it's collapsed. You can't go in to see a room that has, 10 million tons of rock in it. And the tunnels are totally collapsed.
And as debate continues over the true impact of the U.S. strikes, Israel is standing firmly by the United States. At a press briefing in New York, Israel's UN ambassador Danny Danon dismissed Iran's claims of victory and declared that President Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. Mr. Danon told reporters that both Israel and the U.S. have demonstrated their ability to push back the evil regime and use the moment to preview plans to expand the Abraham Accords, inviting more Arab states into formal ties. He suggested that behind indirect talks between Iran and Israel may happen soon, though not necessarily through the UN Security Council.
The IDF achieved complete air superiority over Iran, struck a severe blow to Iran's military leadership, and dismantled dozens of the regime's key strategic sites. Our forces acted with precision, resolve, and restraint. These threats no longer hang over the people of Israel as they did just a few days ago. In full coordination with President Trump, Israel has agreed to a ceasefire. We thank the United States for its support and for its critical role in helping remove the Iranian nuclear threat. Last night, 4 innocent civilians were murdered in Beersheba by Iran. Their tragic deaths are a reminder of the evil we faced. My friends, Israel is a peaceful nation. We pray for peace 3 times a day, but let no one mistake our desire for peace as a weakness. Any violation of the ceasefire and any threat against our people will be met with a forceful response. We have seen the seismic impact of the Abraham Accords. Today, I have no doubt that the leadership Israel displayed in recent days will enable more countries to join the path of normalization. Israel has proven that it can confront the most serious threats in the region and that we will never hesitate to defend our future. Well, first, I think that President Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. I think we should thank him for his leadership, for the brave decision he took, and to recognize the effort of the United States.
Meanwhile, Iran's UN representative Saeed Iravani condemned the airstrikes on the country's nuclear facilities as illegal and without justification, calling Israel an undeclared nuclear power that defies the very treaties it criticizes. He told the Security Council that the strikes violated international law and dangerously undermined the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Mr. Iravani insisted Iran has remained in compliance with atomic regulations while Israel continues to block inspections and refuses to join the non-proliferation treaty. But tensions boiled over when Ambassador Danan fired back, calling Iran masters of lies and delays. He said if deception were an Olympic sport, Iran would take gold.
Legally and procedurally, Israel has no standing to take part in this meeting. This regime has no connection to the agenda of the meeting, no resolution 2231 or the JCPOA. The participants to the JCPOA, as mentioned in resolution 2231, are clearly defined, and the Council's practice in convening meeting under this agenda item has always been limited to the JCPOA participants. With the full U.S. support, Israel has targeted Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities, civilians and civilian infrastructure. Israel falsely justified these attacks on Iran's peaceful nuclear program as an imminent threat. This claim is baseless and has no legal base. In reality, Israel, the region's only undeclared nuclear-armed entity and non-party to NPT, refused IAEA inspections and monitoring, while Iran complies with the NPT and has subjected its nuclear program to the most rigorous IAEA monitoring. The breach of Resolution 2231 and international law is not limited to Israel. The United States, a permanent Council member responsible for upholding its resolution, also attacked Iran. These illegal actions set a dangerous precedent, undermine the non-proliferation regime, and damage the credibility of the Security Council. Resolution 2231 was intended to promote peaceful solution and strengthen the Council's role in preventing unnecessary crises. However, reckless attacks on Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities by Israel and the U.S. has gravely weakened this role. It is disappointing that the Council failed to condemn these illegal attacks, despite a strong request by Resolution 487, which prohibits such illegal acts. We call on the Council to, at the very least, explicitly condemn these aggressions and ensure they don't happen again.
Meanwhile, the Security Council convened for its biannual briefing on the implementation of a resolution which endorsed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on Iran's nuclear program. Briefing the Council, the Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, said that the military escalation between Israel and Iran since June 13 and United States airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities on June 21 complicated prospects for achieving full implementation of a resolution.
The military escalation between Israel and Iran since 13 June and United States airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities on 21 June complicated prospects for achieving full implementation of Resolution 2231. Iran strikes yesterday in a base in Qatar, an action which the Secretary General condemned, further exacerbated insecurity in an already tense region. At the heart of this conflict is the nature of Iran's nuclear program. Following the deadly clashes of the past 12 days, the ceasefire agreement is an opportunity to avoid a catastrophic escalation and achieve a peaceful resolution of the Iran nuclear issue.
President Trump has clearly reiterated that it is time for Iran to make peace. Despite the president's continuous good faith efforts to negotiate and resolve these issues diplomatically, Iran's leaders stonewalled and ultimately refused to agree to a deal that would have prevented them from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon.
And the UN Secretary General is praising the ceasefire deal brokered by President Trump between Israel and Iran. At a press briefing in New York, spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said the UN was deeply alarmed by the violence of the past 2 weeks, but welcomed the chance to avoid further escalation. He stressed that the UN chief is urging all member states to uphold their obligations under international law and the UN Charter.
As you saw earlier today on social media, the Secretary General welcomed President Trump's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. The Secretary General urges the two countries to respect that ceasefire fully. The fighting must stop, he said, as the people of both Israel and Iran have already suffered too much. The Secretary General hopes that this ceasefire can be replicated in the other conflicts in the region. We also, yesterday afternoon, the Secretary General also expressed his deep alarm at the further escalation of the conflict in the Middle East in relation to the attack by Iran on the state of Qatar. In a tweet, he strongly condemned the attack on Qatar, a country that he said has been active for peace in the region and further afield. The Secretary General urges all member states to uphold their obligations under international law and the UN Charter.
And back at the NATO summit, Secretary General Mark Rutte hailed U.S. President Donald Trump for urging NATO allies to boost their defense spending. Mr. Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, publicly toasted President Trump during a pre-summit dinner at The Hague, praising his long-standing leadership and urging allies to boost military spending. He said the summit will finalize a landmark decision to raise defense spending across NATO to 5% of the GDP, a target most countries had long resisted. That praise comes as tensions rise over the alliance's role in global conflicts. He said the world is now more dangerous than ever, with threats stretching from the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific. While critics accuse NATO of expanding beyond its mandate, the alliance says it's simply responding to the demands of modern conflict.
The world is a dangerous place. We are confronted with profound security threats that span from the Euro-Atlantic to the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific. But I'm absolutely confident that together, with the leaders in this room tonight, we will emerge stronger and make our countries and the world safer. NATO will continue to be a central part of that. Tomorrow, NATO allies will make a very big decision on defense investment that will go down in history as transformational. This will be something to celebrate. These decisions are rooted in NATO's core mission of protecting our 1 billion people and will make for a stronger alliance and a safer world. It will also be a massive achievement in making NATO fairer. For decades, the United States sought to get Europe to truly step up. Now, European allies and Canada will equalize their defense spending with the United States. So let me salute President Trump's long-standing leadership in calling for NATO to increase defense spending. Today, I am pleased to announce that NATO has already added an additional $1 trillion in defense spending over the past decade. Mr. President, dear Donald, that is thanks to you pushing us. And tomorrow we will build on that foundation and add trillions more in defense spending, because we need to do this.
Well, staying with that summit, the Hague summit has been described by several leaders as historic, and the Secretary General said that decisions made today would include continued support for Ukraine while pushing for peace as well. Only Spain has rejected the target of spending 3.5% on defense by 2035, with a further 1.5% on related projects.
One ally, the United States, carried too much of the burden of that commitment, and that changes today. President Trump, dear Donald, you made this change possible. Your leadership on this has already produced $1 trillion in extra spending from European allies since 2016. And the decisions today will produce trillions more for our common defense to make us stronger and fairer by equalizing spending between America and America's allies. Allies will also agree to further increase defense production so that our armed forces have everything they need. That means a huge expansion of our defense industrial base on both sides of the Atlantic. That's good for our security, it's good for our economies and good for our jobs. Our decisions include continuing our support to Ukraine, while also pushing for a just and lasting peace. We all want the bloodshed to stop.
Let's get more on this, as NATO member states are indeed in the Netherlands for the major summit. The Defense Alliance's gathering focuses heavily on defense spending against the backdrop of the outbreak of hostilities between member states, US and Israel and Iran in the Middle East. For more, we're being joined on the program by DW correspondent Arthur Sullivan from Berlin. Arthur, great to see you today.
Well, this NATO meeting of NATO since Donald Trump returned to the White House, and the expectation up until very recently was that the focus at this meeting would be on defence spending, how much member states would commit to defence spending, and Trump's apparent success in getting them to pay more. But that conflict in the Middle East, the Israeli attacks on Iran, Iranian responses, the US attacks on Iran, apparent ceasefire, and now further uncertainty, that's obviously become a focus ahead of the gathering. Now, there have been some protests in The Hague where the meeting's taken place ahead of the summit, mostly with an anti-war message. And NATO and its Secretary-General, Mark Rutte, have not really addressed the Iran issue that forcefully. Rutte's big comment was that, in his view, the US attacks did not violate international law. And then on Tuesday, Trump himself published a really quite remarkable text message that he had received from Rutte, where the NATO leader praised the, quote, truly extraordinary and, quote, decisive action from the US in Iran, saying it, quote, made us all safer. So going by that at least, it's pretty clear that within NATO, there's not going to be much dissent or disagreement regarding what the US has done in the Middle East.
And the big question at this NATO meeting, and the big topic being discussed, is defense spending by members. What exactly do you think is going to be discussed and announced at the end of the meeting?
Well, since Trump's first term, this topic of what percentage of member nations' GDP they spend on defence has been just constant. So for years that target was 2%, and for years most failed to meet that target. Now, a combination of Trump's own pressure and also the war in Ukraine means that now all but 10 of the 32 members do actually meet that target. But the big ticket item at this summit is that there's going to be, hopefully, from NATO's perspective, a new target. That's a 5% target which combines two figures: 3.5% of GDP on defence spending, and then an extra 1.5% of GDP on defence-related infrastructure spending. So that's things like roads, bridges and cybersecurity. And the idea is that all of this spending would be in place by 2030, so a very, very big commitment. Now, NATO officials have been working for months to try and find agreement, and they have largely found consensus. And I think the best example of how much that has changed is right here in Germany, For years, it was a real laggard when it came to this topic, but now it's living up to the pledge it made that it would reach a turning point after Russia invaded Ukraine. It's going to boost its defence spending by more than 2/3 by 2029 in order to meet these new pledges. But there is one big issue with these plans, and that's Spain. Spain is quite clearly opposed to this. Its Prime Minister has said that it doesn't agree that it should have to spend this much. It currently is one of the 10 that doesn't meet the 2% target. And its Prime Minister, who's one of the few left-wing Prime Ministers in Europe, he thinks that it's unreasonable and that it could damage social spending and green investment in Spain. Now, there is the possibility that Spanish opposition will lead to other countries seeking possible exemptions and opt-outs. That could lead to complaints from Trump of more European freeloading, as he calls it. And so the big thing we're really going to find out from this meeting today is, will there be an agreement? What will that agreement be? And what are the nature of those possible opt-outs for Spain and others?
Well, another issue that raises questions amongst the members of NATO is there have been existential questions about its future, mostly regarding the U.S. role under President Donald Trump. Can this meeting shore things up?
Well, Trump's views have really dominated the narrative around NATO for a decade, including when he wasn't president, in that period in between him winning the 2 elections. So the leader of NATO's most powerful member, the US, his views still define and guide these gatherings. A really good example is that his recent early walkout from a G7 meeting prompted NATO to keep this meeting shorter than usual. So there's only going to be one 2.5-hour meeting involving the heads of state. That's less than normal, and that's going to take place today. And that should ensure at least that Trump stays for the whole meeting. But there are growing fears ahead of this meeting that Trump could try and water down US commitment to NATO's Article 5. And that's the famous pledge that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. Now, on his flight to The Hague, Trump told reporters that there were, in his words, numerous definitions of Article 5, and that he will give his definition when he gets there. Now, Mark Rutte claimed yesterday that US commitment to NATO is, in his view, unwavering. But I don't think that this gathering is going to realistically lead to any transformed state in the transatlantic partnership. Under Trump, the US has consistently shown itself to be an unpredictable and at times unreliable partner on defence. And that's something that European leaders now routinely refer to. So an agreement on new spending pledges would be a boost to NATO cohesion, and it would definitely be celebrated by Trump as a big personal victory. But I think few present at this meeting are going to be swept up by any idea that whatever is said here is going to fundamentally improve or change the transatlantic partnership. I think most agree that that ship has sailed.
Arthur, thanks again. Coming up after the break. Dozens of people hospitalized as the heat wave descends on eastern North America. Do stay with us for details. Welcome back to the program. Hundreds of protesters gathered in The Hague to demonstrate against NATO, as well as attack leaders like US President Donald Trump and Viktor Orban. Protesters chanting and waving flags on the streets claim NATO has overstepped its boundaries and is no longer a defensive alliance. They also accuse NATO of supporting and escalating the Middle East crisis.
NATO has overstepped its boundaries. It's no longer a defensive alliance. It really operates outside of the North Atlantic. It has bases in Cyprus, which is not a NATO member state. It has bases in the Philippines, in Japan. NATO is responsible for bombing countries in the Middle East. I don't think it is such a defensive alliance as it is an offensive alliance. So I think if we're thinking about defense in Europe, we need something different than NATO. We need an alternative to NATO, an alternative that is not founded upon Western imperialism, but rather one founded upon what the people need, like more of a proletarian kind of construct instead of the capitalist Western imperialist one.
I don't think that's producing more weapons will make the world safer in any way. And I think that the West already is producing more weapons and has bigger armies than any enemies. So I think it's not needed.
We are most committed to the US of A, and I don't like that. When Trump wants to attack other countries, I think he is beginning an unforeseen war, and I don't like that as well.
Trump is a loser, an asshole, and he should disappear as soon as possible. He's destroying the world.
Well, police detained several pro-Palestine activists near Rotterdam's port market after clashes erupted during protests against the Netherlands' alleged role in supplying F-35 fighter jet parts to Israel. Activists condemned the government for circumventing a Court of Appeal ruling ordering a halt to direct Dutch F-35 exports to Israel over concerns of violating international law in Gaza. According to the organizer, the supply chain includes stops in Rotterdam, France, the UK, Germany, before parts are assembled in the United States and shipped to Israel. The protest follows research by the Palestinian Youth Movement identifying Rotterdam as a key hub with Maersk-operated ships frequently transporting F-35 components for maintenance. This supply chain allegedly persists despite the 2024 Hague court order banning exports over Gaza war violations.
So the Dutch court has ruled that the Netherlands can no longer deliver F-35 parts, which are parts of the bomber jets that are being used to bomb Gaza, to Israel. But now the Dutch government has found a way to circumvent this ruling by doing indirect shipments to Israel. So this means that the wings are coming from Israel to France, then to London, then to the Netherlands, then to Germany, and then they go to the United States, where the jets are assembled, and then the jets go to Israel, where they are used to bomb Palestinians in the night, where they are used to bomb hospitals. And we say it doesn't matter at what point in the chain we are complicit no matter what. It doesn't matter if the F-35 parts go directly from Rotterdam to Palestine, if the F-35 parts go through Rotterdam, through the US, even if they go through 10 other countries. If we are at any place in this chain, we are complicit. This must be stopped. There is no excuse to let this ship, the Maersk Izmir, into the port of Rotterdam.
Elsewhere, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has requested more sanctions against Russia. He urged the European allies to impose painful sanctions on Moscow to force Russia to peace, while calling on partners to provide sustained defense support for Kyiv during an address to the Dutch Parliament in The Hague. Mr. Zelensky offered a two-step approach to move toward ending the conflict, starting with the implementation of tougher sanctions. He added that discussions of a revised oil price cap will help bring peace closer, as well as cut Moscow off from the international banking system. In June, European heads proposed an 18th package of sanctions against Russia, targeting its energy, banks, and economy, as the European Union aims to pressure Moscow into agreeing to a ceasefire with Ukraine. However, Hungary and Slovakia decided to block the EU's sanctions package against Moscow during the Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Brussels. Mr. Zelensky also outlined the need for sustained defense support for Kyiv's partners.
Це головна мішень російських атак. Кожного разу вона показує справжню природу путінської війни. Він те саме робив в Чечні, він те саме робив в Сирії. І зараз він це робить в Україні. Його пропагандисти відкрито погрожують іншим націям. Наша розвідка та ваша розвідка так само, та розвідка європейська каже це, що Росія планує потенційно руйнівні дії, ворожі проти території НАТО.
Let's get some more on the war in the Middle East, especially all the latest developments between Israel and Iran and all the other parties, especially the meeting of NATO in The Hague. Let's bring in Captain Bish Johnson, a national security expert joining us from Abuja. Captain, thank you so much for your time on the program today.
Thank you and good evening.
Right, first, what does it actually mean to destroy a nuclear program like Iran's? Are we talking about the facility building, equipment, the uranium enrichment program? What does President Trump mean when he says we have pushed back Iran's nuclear plan for decades?
Okay, let me use just the simplest way to explain this. Destruction of the program, I can liken it to a building, that is already occupied by human beings, furnished and occupied by human beings, and then you drop a bomb on that building. So when you drop a bomb on that building, a few things are going to happen. Is either you destroy the entire building, or you destroy a part of it, or you destroy the equipment, just a combination of that. So what President Trump is saying is that, look, we have set back their nuclear program by a certain number of months or years, okay? But arbitration means that you completely destroy it. That means that everything has been destroyed. You destroyed the facility itself, destroyed the equipment, and destroyed anything that could aid in reconstructing that program. But that is not what seemed to be the case, because the point that the Iranians are making is that, look, even if you destroy the facility, we still have the scientists, the technical know-how, and that it can still be reconstructed. So that is what it means. It can mean any one of those things. It can mean that it is completely destroyed, or it can mean that a portion of it is destroyed.
And the U.S. and Israeli leader have praised the strikes, but a leaked intel from the Pentagon itself paints a different picture. Do you think, what happened, it happened as the U.S. launched their strikes targeting Iran's nuclear sites? The leak, that is?
Okay, that is the intelligence report, the leaked intelligence report that came out.
Yes.
And so what is the question? If it's
Well, do you think the leak happened, it occurred as the U.S. was launching those strikes on Iran?
Well, you see, at this point in time, it's very difficult to definitively make a conclusion the extent of damage as a result of those strikes. And this is because of the following reasons. First and foremost, the US and Israel don't have boots on the ground, right? For you to give a definitive conclusion on the extent of destruction, there has to be boots on the ground, or you have a definitive way of confirming the extent of the damage. As it stands right now, there is no such situation from the American and the Israeli side. The only people that have access to those sites are the Iranians. And I can guarantee you that the Iranians will not cooperate with any party to go there to ascertain the extent of the destruction. The Iranians know exactly what has happened, whether it is obliterated or a part of it is destroyed, but it's not an information that they will be willing to give out to anybody right now, because that is something that they will hold to themselves as part of their negotiating strategy. If they give out the information that the entire infrastructure has been destroyed, they have pretty much put themselves in a bind should they go for the diplomacy. So the answer to your question is that nobody knows exactly the extent of damage that is done to those facilities. And that can only be determined when there is a definitive way of going there to make, what is called barrel damage assessment, that is BDA.
Right, and some of the aides of the U.S. president are saying that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize because it was his attack on Iran that actually got Iran to push back and agree to the ceasefire deal because, quote, it probably didn't want to continue with this war. Do you think that's what happened, or do you think Iran is just waiting, playing the waiting game to see what else is going to happen?
Well, it's a combination of factors. It's the fact that, besides the strikes that were carried out by the Americans, Iran is in its worst and most vulnerable situation since October 7th, when Hamas launched the attacks on Israel. Since that time, Israelis have been on the offensive. The Israelis have pretty much decimated Hezbollah in Lebanon. They've decimated Hamas in Gaza. Syria is no longer being controlled by an enemy, and the Houthis are too far away to attack Israel. So it has been a chain of events that led to where the Iranians find themselves today. So they are in a weak position. Then added to the US strikes that equally weakened them even more. So that is why you see them. As it stands right now, their best option is a negotiated and diplomatic solution.
Right. And earlier we heard the Iranian authorities saying that because it's a war, it was a war with Iran, it hasn't forgotten about its, attacks on Hamas and its ground operations in the Gaza Strip. Do you think now is the time, because there's a lull in the process, now is the time to seriously consider deep discussions about peace between Israel and Hamas?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for all of those situations, since they are talking about peace in the Middle East. Middle East does not only comprise of Iran and Israel. Gaza is also part of the Middle East. So I think what may likely happen is that this has provided an opportunity for everybody that is involved in the negotiation process, to discuss all of the issues. I also heard there is a proposal that was put forward by the United States before this time, that they will also have to, look at, there was a press conference today by the Qatari leadership, alluding to the fact that they will look into a former proposal made by the United States with respect to Gaza and Israel.
Right. It's a pleasure again having you today for those discussions. National security expert, Captain Bish Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
Elsewhere now, a dangerous heat wave has gripped eastern North America, sending dozens of people to hospital with heat-related illnesses. In New Jersey, Patterson City's mayor declared a state of emergency after more than 150 people fell ill at an outdoor school graduation ceremony. In Washington, D.C., 6 people got medical treatment during a concert at a South Korean band from the Midwest to the East Coast and across Canadian provinces like Ontario and Quebec. Heat warnings are in place, impacting more than 160 million people throughout the week. Well, from that to an equally severe weather, torrential rains have unleashed catastrophic flooding across southwest China, forcing the evacuation of over 80,000 people as rivers overflowed and infrastructure failed in Guizhou Province's Rongjiang County. Authorities confirmed the flooding exceeded 30-year severity benchmarks, triggering mass relocations to higher ground and emergency shelters. Southern China has experienced heavy rain since last week as the annual East Asia monsoon intensified, breaking rainfall records in several parts of the country. Elsewhere now, the ongoing crisis in Afghanistan, the international presence, particularly through the United Nations, plays a crucial role in providing a degree of protection and prevention of further deteriorating the situation. This is according to the UN Special Representative for Afghanistan, Rosa Otunbayeva. She says Afghans themselves acknowledge that the country would be in a significantly worse state without international assistance and the presence of organizations like the United Nations.
Extensive outreach and many interactions with Afghan people across the country, it is their view that both Afghans and the country would be in a far worse place without the presence and assistance of the international community. At the very least, the international presence provides an element of protection and prevention. This May, dozens of our female national staff were subjected to explicit death threats from unidentified individuals in relation to their work with UNAMA and other UN agencies, funds, programs, requiring us to implement interim measures to protect their safety. In our subsequent engagements with the de facto authorities, they said they were not responsible, but it was also clear these armed individuals were operating with impunity in a coordinated manner in the capital. This is a strong rebuke to the de facto authorities' claim that they have established security and secured the safety and dignity of Afghan women.
Let's get back to the story on the extreme weather in the United States of America, the heat wave that had sent people to hospital after they fell ill because of the rise in temperatures. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Bird joins us now to give us details on what's happening in North America. Maria, how are you doing? How is the weather over there?
Well, the heat is at such extreme temperatures that the moment you walk outside, you're pretty much sweating. And so it's a bit uncommon for us. We did start our summer season a little bit later this year. Typically, the weather would be 80s, 90s in late May, early June. But just about a week and a half ago, or a little less than that, we were in the 70s. And so to jump from the 70s to now temperatures that are about 100 degrees, and then the heat indexes are so high, as you mentioned, is creating oftentimes heat strokes and hospitalization for those individuals who are elderly or at risk.
So what are experts saying? We do know that people needed medical care at a concert. Could that mean that the heat will only seriously impact a person who is in a crowded space or triggers like that?
Yeah, so on the East Coast section of the United States and some parts of the Midwest, you have the humidity and the temperatures. The air is so thick. And unfortunately, as we know, we still deal with a lot of pollution challenges here in the United States. And so when the air is that thick, you're in a crowded area, the heat is at those intense levels, it does create challenges for people to breathe. We all know that asthmatics and those with respiratory compromised illnesses oftentimes are the first affected by this type of extreme heat and high heat index levels. And so that's what we're really seeing is individuals who might have already been at risk in these crowded areas having to then seek medical attention.
And how has this affected, everyday life, especially people who work in the outdoors? They essentially cannot do much work if this is affecting them and affecting their health.
Yeah, so those who are working outdoors, which honestly, summertime is a very time of the year that many people are working outdoors. And so you see many of the landscaping companies, construction work, because we are an area, the East Coast, that has all four seasons. And so it's hard to do some of this outside work during the winter months because of the snow brings in some challenges with that. And so this is a time of year where lots of outside work is done. What this is really meaning for those individuals is they're having to find shelter during their break times. Obviously, there's an extensive amount of water that they're being advised to be required. But for some of these jobs, oftentimes they're having to shut down for the day and maybe start again, or change their hours of operation, which will cut down the amount of productivity, starting very early in the morning and ending earlier in the day before the extreme heats hit.
Right. I do know that in places like China, where we have a lot of rainfall and flooding, evacuations have been taking place. What are the climate authorities saying about when this heat wave is expected to end?
Well, we're looking at throughout this week, maybe into next week as well. We'll have these types of temperatures. Authorities are also looking at emergency centers to be able to provide heat relief for individuals that don't have air conditioning in their places where they're living, whether or not it's their home or whether or not it's their apartment building. So there are oftentimes temporary facilities to be able to have what they call cooling centers. So that's some of the things the government is putting in place to ensure that people are able to get through these next few days.
Yeah, thanks again. And still ahead on the program, we'll meet the Italian inventor behind a 50-centimeter wide panda car. That's in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The World Health Organization has released its report on the global tobacco epidemic 2025 at the World Conference on Tobacco Control in Dublin, warning that action is needed to maintain and accelerate progress in tobacco control as rising industry interference challenges tobacco policies and control efforts. The report focuses on the 6 proven WHO-empowered tobacco control measures to reduce tobacco use, which claims over 7 million lives a year.
This report shows that the world is starting to turn the corner on tobacco control. 6.1 billion people are now protected by at least one tobacco control measure. That's over 75% of the world's population and 5 times more than in 2007. There are only 4 countries that have achieved the full empowered technical package of tobacco control measures. Those are Brazil, Mauritius, the Netherlands, and Turkey. There are another 7 countries that only have one measure to go to achieve this landmark achievement. Unfortunately, there are 40 countries that don't have a single one of these measures at best practice level yet.
And as we close, 30-year-old Andrea Marazzi from a small town east of Milan has stunned car enthusiasts with his latest invention, the world's narrowest panda car at just 50 centimeters wide. After a year of meticulous work involving cutting, welding, and reshaping the iconic car's body, Marazzi unveils his creation at the Pandino, the international rally celebrating the Fiat Panda. The Marazzi explains how the vehicle runs, saying that the battery and fully functional cabin was built around the size of his torso. Mr. Marazzi added that the inspiration came from years of seeing Panda enthusiasts modify the car in every conceivable way.
Posteriore, sotto ci sono parte elettrica, le batterie, doppia batteria.
I'm not sure how comfortable that is. I'm not sure I'll certainly be riding in one of those, but here we are. That's it on The World Today. Thank you for watching. I'm Jokia Rogers.